Welcome to this episode of Toys Bag Zen. Today, I'm going to show you guys my techniques and a couple different ways of painting the enemy Skull and Crossbones logo. Now, I've got an example here with the Skull and Crossbones logo on his helmet, and you can see it can be kind of an intimidating thing to try to paint freehand, but I'm going to show you the way that I do it, and we're going to fix up some other little paint scuffs here and there on a bunch of other figures that I do have. There's a little bit of white detail on these and black paint. And I really like these figures. They have a really cool look and design. The only thing I don't really care about these old figures is how their arms are in the pose that they are. It really limits them. The only figure that I can think of in this line on the enemy side that does not have the Skull and Crossbones logo is Muton. For some reason, he did not come with it. These are Red Shadow figures, and they were made by Palitoy back in the early 80s. You can see here that the logo is clearly missing. His badge on his right chest is missing, and a bunch of other things. Here's some other enemy figures that I have. A bunch of these, they all have the logos on their head, and I'm not really going to touch them up because I want to keep them as original as possible. But there are some black paint scuffs on some of these figures, and I'm just going to touch those up just a little tiny bit. You'll notice that the Red Shadow figures, some of them have black gloves and some of them have unpainted gloves, so that's kind of interesting. I also have Baron Ironblood, and this is Black Major. Now, Black Major here, he has a logo on his chest that we're going to have to also paint, and Baron Ironblood, I'm just going to paint his hair on his head. You can see on this figure, this is Skeletron. He doesn't have a painted logo, it's just a sticker, so once that's rubbed off, you'd have to create a new one. Now, later on in Palitoy's line, they were taking the Hasbro figures and repainting them under the Palitoy license, and this clearly is this is not the original Palitoy figure. This is clearly a version 2 Cobra Commander, and I did this about 17 years ago. I also did a Destro too, and this figure from Palitoy was originally called the Red Laser. He came with a repaint of the HAL vehicle. And so he was yellowed and didn't have his crest, so I repainted him. And then here we have the Red Jackal, which is just a repaint of the Destro figure. And so those were what I did about 15, 16 years ago. They're not bad. The top of this helmet should come to a point with the black crest, and that's been worn off. There's quite a bit of wear and tear on this helmet of this figure. So to help me paint the lines a little bit better, and also so that I get a point at the top of the triangle, I'm just going to use some of this green tape. This is not the most ideal tape to use. You'd probably want to use more of a tape for doing like fine lines on modeling and stuff like that. And that tape is kind of more like a plastic tape. And it's also usually thin so that you can do curves and stuff. But I'm just going to use this. This is what I have on hand right now. Perhaps I'll get some of that other tape later on. And we're just going to use this and paint it. So I'm going to use a paintbrush. This one, I kind of cut a bunch of the bristles off so that I just have just a very fine tip. I am planning on buying some better paintbrushes soon. I do have some really nice paintbrushes that I use for touch-ups on guitars because I do fix guitars. But I'm going to get probably some more of those for this kind of work. From what I can tell from my other figures, the top and the bottom of their satchels and canteens were not painted. So I'm going to do that on this figure and paint the top and bottom just to make it look a little bit more realistic. So here's a black major figure, and he needs some paint work on his hat. So I took some enamel paint. I love enamel paint. It's my favorite to use. It's just really messy, and I just painted the top of his head. So it's kind of glossy, where the acrylic paint I'm using today on these other figures for the white and the black is all a kind of a matte finish. So I've cleaned this guy up. I used some lighter fluid to clean up all the marks off of his white suit, his white uniform. And I'm just going to paint his hair on his head, which is a white also. Really easy to paint. Just clean it up a little bit, and he'll look great. His logo is still good on his chest, so we shouldn't have to do anything there. Now this is where it gets a little trickier, trying to make straight lines on his shoulders. Now I'm using a fine-tipped paintbrush, and you can get finer tips than this, which I'm going to probably have to purchase some someday. But this is what I'm using. It seems to be working just fine. And I'm just using my red shadows that still have the lines as kind of a guide to what they look like. And that turned out pretty good. So now comes the tricky part, is doing the skull and crossbones. Now here I am using a paintbrush, and you can use a paintbrush if you want to. It's pretty tricky to do it. You don't want to use a lot of paint. That is the key to this, is using very little paint. Do not load your paintbrush very much. And then when you create lines, you want to do it in one stroke of the hand. Don't come back to it. Just one stroke. Do one line. And these are the bones, the crossbones here. And then I also have a toothpick that I'm using. So a toothpick you could use for the whole logo if you want to. And it takes a lot longer, but just using little dots and dabbing the paint in where you want it, you can really get good control for fine details. I think that turned out pretty good. Let's use the toothpick here for the skull too. Okay, I'll wait and let this paint dry, and let's move on to the black major figure. The logo is already there, but I'm just going to follow the outline of it and try my best and see if I can make the logo as good as what was there before. There is a raised medal on his right chest, and it's raised in the plastic. So if you just take a little bit of white and gently go across the top of that raised part, you will get a pretty accurate paint job on on his pocket there. And there's a couple stripes here on his collars. So those are pretty easy to do really quickly. Great. We've got the triangles on his shoulders. We've got the pretty much all the white detail that's on this figure was repainted. And all the rest of these red shadows, I've pretty much touched up a lot of the black and a little bit of the white on the shoulders. Next, we're going to do the eyes and the details for the nose and the mouth. What you can do is use your paintbrush, and any inconsistencies of the white paint, you can paint black around it just to kind of clean up some of your lines a little bit. So again, you can use a paintbrush with this fine detail, or you can use a toothpick. Now, it's really easy to make a mistake and put too much paint in one area. Don't worry, we can clean that up after the paint dries. Or, because this is acrylic paint, the nice thing about it is that if you mess up, you can just take some alcohol on a piece of paper, or on if you have like alcohol swabs that you can buy at the drugstore. You can just wipe this paint off even after it's dried, and it will wipe completely off clean, and you can start from the drawing board again. So here you can see I'm starting with the eyes of the skull, and I've decided that I like using the toothpick method for this. It's just a lot easier to get that detail in there. And there's a lot more control. Now that my black is dry, I'm getting some more white, and I'm just cleaning up my lines a little bit, trying to make everything look a little better. And you can do this as many times as you want. The problem with acrylic is it can get a little thick if you're not thinning it out with water. Because it's a water-based paint, you can just use water to do it. Now, if you're using oil paints, you can use paint thinner to thin out your paint if you want to make it a little bit more watery. But I think that turned out pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Here is an example of it with a genuine logo. And I think it turned out pretty good. And here's an example of my logo compared to the sticker on Skeletron. Now, I'm going to do this again, but this time I decided to try a different technique. This is a technique where you can scrape away the paint. Now, I painted black underneath the white, so I can scrape away the white paint, and this is dry paint. And you just don't want to scrape all the way through the black, because then you're going to get red in for the eyes, which might actually look pretty cool, but it's supposed to be black. So with a knife like this, or you can use a screwdriver, like a flat tip screwdriver or anything, you can actually scrape the white paint away and get that fine detail you can see around the nose and the mouth. And I think that is a great way of doing it. Tell me your techniques. Do you have any techniques that you use for painting fine detail like this? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn about your experience and what you like to use. And then scraping that away can just really clean up everything and make it look really good. Yeah, I'm really happy with that. I find that the right top bone is a little weird. It's not quite in the direction that I wanted it, but that's okay. I'm happy with it. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters. And you can see how these figures that I've repainted, they look great sitting with the other figures that have the original logos. I did use a matte paint here, and a really good thing to do is maybe take some varnish. You can get gloss varnish, you can get satin varnish, and just to kind of make the paint that you just put on there that's matte kind of the more of the gloss that you would expect from the original figures. So thanks for watching. I'm Toys Back Zen. Please like, subscribe to my channel if you like what you're seeing here. Leave a comment down below and share this video with other people that you think might enjoy it. Thanks for getting this far, and see you later.